British horror has always operated differently. Where American films leaned into spectacle and Italian cinema embraced fever dream excess, the UK built its nightmares on atmosphere, folklore, and psychological dread. These weren't films designed to shock through gore alone. They unsettled through implication, through what lurked just beyond the frame, through old rituals and ancient curses that refused to stay buried. From Hammer's Gothic productions to experimental art house terror, British filmmakers understood that true horror doesn't need to explain itself. It lingers in country estates and crumbling churches, in repressed desires and pagan memories older than the landscape itself. These films trust the audience to sit with discomfort, letting unease build without the promise of easy answers. This is a journey through British horror at its most distinctive. 10 films that prove the UK has always known how to craft nightmares that feel uniquely, disturbingly their own. Peeping Tom, 1960. Few films rattled audiences and critics as deeply as Peeping Tom. Directed by Michael Powell, it tells the story of Mark Lewis, a shy cameraman who harbors a dark obsession. He films women as he murders them, capturing the exact moment of terror on their faces. Played with chilling restraint by Karl-Heinz Boehm, Mark is both predator and tragic figure, forever warped by his father's cruel experiments in fear. The film is a sharp, unsettling look at voyeurism, long before the word became part of pop culture. Its use of the killer's camera as our point of view forces the audience to become complicit, watching the crimes unfold through the same lens Mark does. For 1960, this was shocking, far more than most moviegoers were ready for. When it premiered, Peeping Tom was reviled in the press, effectively ending Powell's celebrated career in Britain. But history has been kinder. Today, it's recognized as one of the most important horror films ever made, a work that anticipated both the slasher genre and cinema's obsession with the psychology of killers. Peeping Tom stands as a bold, controversial film that dared to stare directly into the act of watching, and made the audience realize that sometimes looking is the most dangerous thing of all. Repulsion, 1965. Roman Polanski's Repulsion isn't just a horror film, it's one of the most chilling portraits of psychological breakdown ever put on screen. Released in 1965, it was Polanski's first English-language feature, and it remains one of his most unnerving works. At the center is Catherine Deneuve as Carol, a young Belgian woman living in London with her sister. When the sister leaves on holiday, Carol is left alone in their apartment, and her fragile state of mind quickly unravels. What begins as subtle unease builds into full paranoia, with Carol hallucinating cracks splitting through the walls, strange noises echoing in the silence, and spectral hands reaching from the shadows to grab her. Deneuve delivers a performance that is both restrained and devastating. With very little dialogue, she conveys Carol's descent entirely through her body language and expressions, shifting from quiet, detached beauty to a figure of absolute terror. It's the kind of role that became career-defining, and she anchors the film with a haunting sense of vulnerability. Polanski amplifies the tension with innovative camera work and sound design. Everyday spaces become warped and threatening, the apartment itself almost alive, reflecting Carol's disintegrating mind. Simple shots of rotting food or unwashed dishes become grotesque, and the claustrophobic setting traps both Carol and the audience inside her nightmare. Upon release, Repulsion shocked audiences with its bold treatment of sexual repression, isolation, and madness. Some critics were horrified by its subject matter, but it has since been recognized as a landmark of psychological horror. It shows that true terror doesn't always come from monsters or killers. The Haunting, 1963. Robert Wise's The Haunting is often hailed as the definitive haunted house movie, not because of what it shows, but because of what it refuses to show. Adapted from Shirley Jackson's classic novel The Haunting of Hill House, it follows a group of people invited to stay in a sprawling, cursed mansion to study its supposed supernatural activity. But as the walls groan and doors buckle, the real horror comes from the fragility of the human mind. Julie Harris delivers one of her greatest performances as Eleanor, a lonely, deeply vulnerable woman who joins the experiment in search of belonging. Harris plays her with such raw intensity that Eleanor's descent feels both heartbreaking and terrifying. Claire Bloom adds complexity as Theo, Eleanor's confident and mysterious counterpart, while Richard Johnson anchors the story as Dr. Markway, the investigator leading the study. Wise, who had cut his teeth as an editor on Citizen Kane and as a director of films like West Side Story, brings technical brilliance to the material. Shooting in black and white cinemascope, he uses extreme angles, distorted lenses, and experimental sound design to make Hill House feel alive. Doors breathe, walls stretch, and thunderous banging fills the halls. Yet the monsters remain unseen, leaving the audience to imagine what Eleanor believes is closing in around her. At a time when horror often leaned on creatures and gore, Wise created something terrifying out of silence, shadows, and suggestion. It's a film that continues to influence everything from modern ghost stories to psychological thrillers. Hill House isn't just haunted, it consumes the fears and desires of those inside, leaving us with one of the most chilling depictions of loneliness and madness ever captured on film. The Devil Rides Out, 1968, Hammer Films adapted Dennis Wheatley's occult thriller with rare seriousness. Christopher Lee stars as the Duc de Richelieu, an aristocrat versed in esoteric knowledge who discovers that his young friend has been recruited by a dangerous occult group led by the refined but threatening Mokata. What follows is a struggle against dark forces treated with unusual authenticity. The symbols, rituals, and terminology aren't embellishments but integral plot elements. Director Terence Fisher applies Hammer's classic Gothic style to a story grounded in occult conflict. Lee, unusually cast as the heroic lead, brings intelligence and authority to a character who relies on knowledge as much as courage. Charles Gray's controlled, soft-spoken performance as Mokata makes him one of Hammer's most effective antagonists. The film's standout sequence, the protective circle scene, showcases restrained but effective visual effects as the heroes endure waves of supernatural assaults. Fisher emphasizes atmosphere over spectacle, letting suggestion enhance the tension. Serious in tone and carefully researched, The Devil Rides Out became one of Hammer's most sophisticated productions. It remains a defining example of British occult cinema done with craftsmanship and respect for its subject matter. The Blood on Satan's Claw, 1971. Piers Haggard's The Blood on Satan's Claw is British folk horror set in 17th century rural England, where a plowman unearths something ancient and malevolent in the fields. As a demonic presence spreads through the village, the local youth fall under its influence, forming a cult, committing atrocities, and slowly transforming as the demon reclaims physical form through their corruption. The film captures genuinely disturbing atmosphere through its rural setting and period detail. This isn't Gothic castle horror, but earthbound evil emerging from the soil itself, corrupting a farming community through its children. Linda Hayden delivers an unsettling performance as the cult's leader, a teenage girl whose transformation from innocent to predatory feels organic and terrifying. Patrick Wymark brings authority as the judge who recognizes demonic influence and takes extreme measures to stop it. The practical effects for the demon's gradual manifestation, clawed limbs, fur-covered skin, inhuman features appearing on young bodies, are effectively disturbing. The violence has real weight, particularly sequences involving the cult's attacks on those who resist or discover their activities. Mark Wilkinson's score uses period instruments to create authentic yet unsettling soundscapes. The film's treatment of witch hunt hysteria is complex, the supernatural threat is real, but the community's response reveals how easily fear and righteousness justify cruelty. The youth cult's activities blur the line between demonic possession and adolescent rebellion finding violent outlet. The rural poverty and isolation make the village feel genuinely cut off from civilization, where old evils can resurface unchecked. The Blood on Satan's Claw stands alongside The Wicker Man and Witchfinder General as essential British folk horror, exploring how ancient evil and human cruelty intertwine in isolated communities where faith and superstition remain powerful forces. Vampire Circus, 1972. A cursed village faces supernatural revenge when a traveling circus arrives 15 years after the townspeople destroyed a vampire. The performers are all vampires or their servants, targeting the descendants of those who participated in the original staking. Hammer Films delivers one of their stranger entries, blending Gothic horror with circus spectacle and psychedelic visuals unusual for the studio. Adrian Corey, Anthony Higgins, and John Mulder Brown populate the vampire circus with performers who seduce and destroy with theatrical flair. The circus setting allows for creative staging, trapeze artists who transform mid-flight, a Hall of Mirrors sequence where reflections don't match reality, a panther that's really a shape-shifting vampire. Robert Young directs with more visual experimentation than typical Hammer productions, using colored lighting and distorted angles. The practical transformation effects are ambitious for Hammer, with vampires changing into animals through dissolve effects and makeup work. The mirror maze sequence is particularly effective, using practical sets and careful blocking to create disorienting space where reality becomes unreliable. The village's plague subplot adds another layer of dread. They're already suffering when the vampires arrive to finish them. The film's sexual frankness pushes beyond Hammer's usual restraint, with the circus performers using seduction as hunting method. Vampire Circus represents Hammer attempting to modernize their formula with contemporary filmmaking techniques while maintaining their Gothic roots, creating something that feels transitional between their classic period and attempts to remain relevant in changing horror landscape. Tower of Evil, 1972. Investigators arrive at a remote lighthouse island where archaeological students were found dead or catatonic, uncovering evidence of ancient Phoenician treasure and ritualistic violence. As a new expedition explores the ruins, the survivors' flashbacks reveal what happened during the first visit, while present-day investigators face the same threat. Jim O'Connelly's British horror blends slasher elements with archaeological mystery. The dual timeline structure builds tension as past horrors inform present danger. The lighthouse setting creates effective isolation, the island becoming trap where escape proves impossible once violence begins. The practical gore effects are surprisingly brutal for 1972 British horror, with explicit violence that pushes beyond typical restraint. The Phoenician angle provides mythology justifying the carnage while hinting at ancient evil protecting buried treasure. O'Connelly stages the attack sequences with real intensity, the killer moving through cramped lighthouse interiors with methodical efficiency. The film's structure influenced later slasher cinema, particularly the summer camp isolation and archaeological expedition setup that would become common. Tower of Evil represents British horror, embracing more explicit violence and American-style body counts while maintaining Gothic atmosphere, creating transitional work between Hammer elegance and grindhouse brutality that would dominate later in the decade. The Reptile, 1966, Hammer offered something unusual with this creature feature, set in a remote Cornish village where unexplained deaths leave victims with darkened skin and no clear cause. A young couple who move into a nearby cottage discover their reclusive neighbor is hiding a tragic secret. His daughter has been forced into a transformative state that periodically turns her into a snake-like creature, with no memory of her actions afterward. Director John Gilling uses the foggy rural setting to build tension, emphasizing superstition, isolation, and fear of the unknown. The film hides the creature for much of its runtime, relying on eerie aftermaths and gradual clues until the final reveal. Roy Ashton's makeup effects are striking and distinctive. Jacqueline Pierce gives the cursed daughter a sympathetic presence, portraying someone torn between her normal life and something she can't control. Noel Willman brings gravitas to the father, trying desperately to contain the situation. Ray Barrett and Jennifer Daniel provide grounding as the couple slowly piecing the mystery together. Hints of a Malaysian backstory and the father's past involvement with unfamiliar rituals add subtle commentary about colonial guilt and cultural misunderstandings, giving the film more depth than its surface premise suggests. The Reptile remains one of Hammer's most unique monster creations, combining strong atmosphere with emotional undertones. The Shout, 1978. In a quiet, windswept English village, Anthony Fielding, a composer fascinated by the boundaries of sound, and his wife Rachel live a life of serene routine until a stranger arrives, bringing with him a claim so outlandish it chills the soul. Charles Crossley is no ordinary traveler. He professes to wield a terrible ancient power, the ability to kill with a single piercing shout. What begins as polite hospitality quickly spirals into a tense, psychological dance as the couple is drawn into a world where logic and reason are pushed to their limits. The film's atmosphere is unforgettable. The Devon coastline stretches wide and lonely, its rugged cliffs and misty landscapes serving as a perfect backdrop for escalating dread. Inside their home, shadows gather in the corners, and everyday sounds, the hum of a refrigerator, the scratch of a piano key, take on a sinister weight. The score, crafted by Genesis members Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford, pulses with an eerie, otherworldly energy, amplifying the tension in ways that are subtle but unforgettable. Each frame seems to whisper that danger is always just beyond perception, that the mind can be both a sanctuary and a prison. At its core, The Shout is a study of power, control, and the fragility of human consciousness. Crossley's presence forces Anthony and Rachel, and the audience, to confront the terrifying possibility that the unseen can dominate the known, that fear itself can become a weapon. The performances are hypnotic, with Alan Bates's enigmatic menace and John Hurt's restrained terror anchoring the story in a way that feels almost tangible. By the time the story reaches its unsettling conclusion, the film has done more than just scare. It lingers, echoing in the imagination, like the very shout it portrays. The Shout is a masterpiece of psychological horror, a film that uses silence, suggestion, and atmosphere to haunt long after the credits roll. The Company of Wolves, 1984, Neil Jordan and Angela Carter adapted Carter's short story collection into something that defies easy categorization. A Gothic fairy tale about Little Red Riding Hood, reimagined as psychosexual coming-of-age horror. The film unfolds as dream-within-dream structure, where a teenage girl's nightmares explore transformation, desire, and the dangerous allure of wolves, who are also men. Sarah Patterson plays Rosaline with wide-eyed curiosity, gradually giving way to self-awareness and agency. The film presents multiple variations on werewolf mythology through stories told by her grandmother, played with knowing menace by Angela Lansbury. Each tale explores different aspects of transformation. Wedding guests revealed as wolves, a pregnant wolf woman giving birth, a young man whose eyebrows meet in the middle. The practical effects by Christopher Tucker and Rodney Holland are spectacular and disturbing. Transformations happen through snouts, bursting from mouths, bodies splitting to reveal wolves, emerging from human skin, and creatures that are neither fully human nor fully animal. The effects emphasize body horror and violation rather than traditional monster movie spectacle. Jordan shoots everything with lush, painterly beauty, all deep forests, candlelit cottages, and richly detailed costumes. The film operates as fever dream where Freudian symbolism, feminist reclamation of fairy tales, and genuine Gothic horror coexist. The wolves represent danger, sexuality, and liberation simultaneously, refusing to be simple metaphors. The Company of Wolves remains polarizing, too art house for horror fans, too horrific for art house audiences. But it's one of the most visually striking and thematically rich werewolf films ever made. If you love discovering forgotten horror and cult cinema, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the films time forgot. Thanks for watching, and remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.